안녕하십니까.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the session 4-3, which is the day 2 of the Korea Global Forum for Peace 2021. We are here to talk about the new vision for inter-Korean relations and community for peace, economy, and life of the Korean Peninsula. My name is No Byung-yeol. I'm a professor at Daejeon University. I am running also the Institute of the Military Affairs. I am a professional on the Korean defense foreign policy. Along with that, I am also the chairperson of the Foundation for the Climate Change for 2030. It is my pleasure to welcome you all, and also it is my happiness for having this opportunity to be in this forum. Also, we have the honor of being surrounded by all the experts, and also we would like to thank very much for the organizers of the Ministry of Unification as well. As you all understand, the hotness of summer is unprecedented in Korea to the level of the disaster in the Korean Peninsula. Also, all these things are, as we expected, are not the exceptions to the adverse effects of the climate changes all around the world. Another thing that I would like to emphasize here is that according to the changes of the inter-Korean relations, the confrontations and the persistence have been taking turns together. Currently, we are now in a deadlock situation of the relationship with the North. At this juncture, it is timely and meaningful for us to have this forum, to have the countermeasures for the climate changes as well as the inter-Korean relations. So we are being surrounded by all the presenters and discussants. It will be very significant for our future setting. As the moderator, I'd like to now give you the agenda that we go along today. We have 3 distinguished presenters, and also we have 3 discussants as well. We will spend the next 90 minutes. I would like to tell you that each presenter is given 20 minutes to have their own presentations. After that, we're going to have the discussion time with the 3 discussants. I'm going to give 10 minutes to each discussant. Thank you very much for your understanding. After finishing this session, both online and offline, we also have the time for Q&A. The questions can be raised through the online platform so that we will be able to answer you in our general discussion. Also, I'd like to tell you that we have our agenda today, so briefly I'm going to give the introduction of our presenters and discussants. And also, each presenter will be able to introduce themselves before starting their presentations or discussants. So I told you that we have 3 presenters, including Mr. Tomasz Wierwurski, Professor of HOOPS, and Dr. Na Yong-woo and Dr. Kim Yong-kan. In addition to them, we have discussants of Dr. Hong Seok-kun, Dr. Kim Il-gi, and Professor Kim Hyung-soo. All these presenters and discussants are actually the very rare gems of our society for the sciences of the climate changes, and they are very renowned scholars in this field, which is quite rare in Korea. So it is my honor and pleasure to have them here today, so my thanks to them all. Out of these 6 people, we have 3 gentlemen offline here together with me, and 3 gentlemen will be meeting us online. Now, without further ado, I would like to now ask Professor Tomasz Wierwurski from HOOPS to have the first presentation. Please remember that you have 20 minutes. Would you like to start to have your own introduction before having the presentation? Thank you.
Professor No for this kind introduction. My name is Tomasz Wierzbowski,
It's my honor and pleasure to be here and take part in this meaningful event. I am involved in many Korean projects, also InterKorean projects and European involvement in the Korean Peninsula. I'm affiliated with Hanguk University of Foreign Studies, and I'm happy to share my thoughts and experience with you. As we all know, the biggest issue with North Korea is lack of credible data. It's very hard to have hard quantifiable data to make explanations and predictions about North Korea and phenomena in North Korea or regarding North Korea. So what I would like to share with you is my own observations, because I visited the country numerous times, and I call it systematic observations, because I visited North Korea multiple times in different places, and certain things I saw, I experienced, might give us some indicators of changes, of climate changes or environmental issues that I would like to touch upon with. And one of the biggest issues, environmental issues in North Korea, is deforestation. Obviously, deforestation is not directly caused by climate changes, by global climate change, but by domestic policy. Energy demand that was even boosted in the Arduous March in mid-90s, and also export that was stopped by sanctions, but still deforestation is a huge issue in the northern part of this peninsula. And this deforestation has a direct effect on people's life and social developments, because it caused as you can see, deforestation is ubiquitous in North Korea. Basically, it's very hard to see forested mountains. And this caused, for example, very serious problems, very serious disasters like flood. And I was part of this flood in August 2015. It was one of those events that even North Korea officially reported in a report that was released in June this year, voluntarily report on the implementation of sustained development goals in North Korea. 2015 was reported as one of those years where when natural disasters caused quite serious death toll. And it's also interesting on the side to mention that I was stuck in North Korea during this flood. I couldn't leave the country because bridges and roads were washed away. And it was reported in foreign media, in Western media, that I was detained. And I will emphasize this issue very often here today. Let's do not politicize certain aspects of North Korean affairs. We don't have to put politics in every aspect of it, like in this flood. Reporting that I was detained was really unnecessary from the international perspective. Anyhow, the whole village was washed away due to this flood that, according to certain experts, was avoidable. If only trees were there on these mountainous areas, if only trees could stop this mudslide and water, this flood would not have happened. And once again, the whole village was washed away. The death toll is not known. At least 40 people died, but some reports also said that even 200 people could have died in this particular flood. And this is how it looked a year later, in 2016. So once again, the whole village was washed away with a mudslide. And in 2016, it was pretty cleared. It was again like a desert. And here I would like to emphasize the North Korean response to environmental issues. This is how they responded. So the year later, in 2017, a new ready-made village was put in the same place. And I was happy to see it, because only in a year, the livelihood of people got better. They had the roof under their head. But if you look carefully, the mountains behind are still deforested. There are no trees. So if flood happened in 2015 and 2016, as we can see here, obviously the same flood can happen in 2025 or 2026, and it's a typical North Korean response to to react practically to some issues, but maybe not systematically, maybe not strategically, because once again, this village was rebuilt, but it's still vulnerable to natural disasters like floods. About climate change, some indirect indicators of climate change. Those birds were not seen, had not been seen in the northern part of the Korean Peninsula 40 or 30 years ago. And they were spotted, they were noticed 2-3 years ago. And I'm not a bird expert, so it's very hard for me to elaborate more on this. But when I was studying the subject, I looked into a Birds of Korea catalog in 2005, and literally these birds were not there in 2005, but were there in 2015, reported by South Korean experts. And those birds are usually, these are migratory birds who travel from the southern part of the globe to north, but they reside in a warmer places, which means that North Korea, obviously, like global trend, got warmer, and those birds right now can be spotted in North Korea, which is an indirect indicator of rising temperature of North Korea. Now, North Korean respond to environmental issues. It's there. It's part of the propaganda. It's popularized, but it's there. They tackle this issue, and it can be seen in official media, in official reports, in official propaganda, and it's made scientifically. They try to science the problem out of it, and they make plans. How effective and how practical those plans are, it's very hard to assess, but they are aware, North Korean authorities are aware of environmental issues of deforestation. They are trying to address this issue and solve the problem in one way or another. And as I mentioned, they try to use science as much as possible. So there is this inventory of new forest areas in North Korea when they try to make surveys on the current status of forestation and the deforestation, and make it replant again trees, to put trees there again. Yes, it's a part of propaganda, so sometimes they do report about successes of reforestation policies and reforestation effects. It's in KCNA, it's in mainstream media, national media as well. From time to time we can see those news and reports that certain policies worked, and we have new central tree nursery here and there, or there is a signal success made in forest restoration in one area or another. So once again, it's a part of the public discourse. Authorities and specialists and also normal people are aware of the deforestation problem and are trying to tackle this issue. Again, observations from the ground, not necessarily from propaganda or official reports, but from the ground. This is Sunsori in 2012. Here, I need to emphasize that this reforestation effort was facilitated by international cooperation. There were international actors from Europe, also financed by the European Union, that made effort here to reforest this area again, and it was quite successful. It's a kind of a pilot project, very successful. This was Sunsori in 2012. This is how it looked in 2016. It's exactly the same area. We can see green plants, we can see forest trees growing there. So once again, North Korean respond to environmental issues, to deforestation, with some help and support from international organizations and European involvement. These are satellite pictures of the same area, 2012 and then 2018. We can clearly see that the whole area changed from being totally deforested into some greenish, more green area. The circles, the red circles, is exactly this village that was reforested, again with some help from international partners. Now, my main point is here: we do not have to reinvent the wheel when we talk about international cooperation to tackle climate change and environmental issues, certain mechanisms are there. And North Korea is a part of many international arrangements and many international organizations that can be utilized to address climate change and environmental issues more effectively by all the parties concerned. Once again, North Korea is a partner of international organizations that are there to tackle climate change and environmental issues. And they are signatory of certain agreements, international agreements, of Paris Agreement, not to mention Kyoto Protocol and so on. So North Korea is a partner that is interested and to some extent active in the global discourse of climate issues and climate policies. And we should remember that they are not that is isolated as sometimes we think. Maybe not very visible here, but this is the participation of North Korean government officials in a conference of parties, COP meetings that are part of the United Nations framework of Convention of Climate Change. And North Korea is sometimes criticized that they participated only in 30% of COP meetings, which is true. If we count the numbers of participation, it's only 30%. But if you look carefully, last two COPs were attended not by embassy staff that was usually attending those meetings in the country where COP took place. The last two COPs were attended by Ri Gyun-shin, who is the director from the Ministry of Land and Environmental Protection, the person who is highly qualified, who is a decision maker and policy maker in North Korea in areas that are tackling climate change and environmental issues, which only means that those issues are much higher on North Korean domestic agenda than they used to be, because obviously if COP happened let's say in Geneva a couple of years ago, only Geneva's staff from the North Korean embassy attended. But once again, two last COPs were attended by high-level officials from the Ministry of Land and Environmental Protection, which only means that North Korean government and North Korean authorities care much more about this dialogue and are seeking cooperation from the international environment. Some inter-Korean cooperation in practice, this is not necessarily related to environment or climate that directly, but since I mentioned those birds, this organization is called East Asian Australasian Flyway Partnership. Both countries, governments and non-governmental organizations are part of this organization. It helps to protect wetlands that are breeding areas for birds, because those birds migrate from southern hemisphere to northern hemisphere 2 times a year, like south to north one time a year and north to south the second part of the year. And this secretariat, this organization, helps to promote the protection of wetlands where those birds breed. And interestingly, North Korea, as well as South Korea, is part of it. It's part of the East Asian Australasian Flyway Partnership. But what I would like to mention here, and I'm not taking any side, and I'm not pointing any fingers, when North Korea wanted to and applied for membership of this particular organization in 2017, it was stopped and blocked by South Korean government. And I understand that it was the previous administration. So once again, my point is here, let me just show you the quote. South Korean government reported officially to the East Asian Australasian Flyway Partnership that North Korea becoming a partner of this organization is not acceptable for South Korea. Once again, if there is no political will, if there is no will, no cooperation can be achieved. On the other hand, there is a will, there is a way, and unfortunately enough, the government changed in 2000, the year later, and North Korea successfully became a partner of East Asian Australasian Flyway Partnership. Just briefly to conclude, once again, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. International organizations, international arrangements, regional arrangements are there. Very forgotten trilateral cooperation secretariat between China, Korea, and Japan is basically not existing anymore in practice. But we have this institutional framework that can be used, and also small bilateral projects, InterKorean projects, cooperation projects on environment, on global, on climate change. If they are put in this international arrangement, they might be much more successful. It's really important to make it multilateral, because in multilateral arrangement the interest and values can be shared and can be successfully implemented on the ground in North Korea with North Korea. And as a very practical example, I would like to mention this quite interesting project. Just to give you a background, the red seaweeds are used to produce agar, and this component is later used in medical science and life science to produce medicines and cosmetics, and also to seek solutions to disasters. These seaweeds are very important part of the medical science research, and Morocco in Africa was the biggest producer of these seaweeds until 2016 or 17, when it cut its production to half in order to protect the environment. They didn't want to overuse their own resources, so they cut the production of seaweed. So there was a huge demand from the research medical market, to find a new source of this red seaweed. And the Nature magazine reported that North Korea is a perfect place to grow, to produce these kinds of seaweeds, because of its very unique geographical features on the Yellow Sea coast, just above the Boreal Island, between South Korea and North Korea. And Professor Han Tae-jun from Ghent University Global Campus here in Sondo came up with this idea to make an international effort to actually grow those red seaweed between South and North Korea, just up from the Pengyong Island. And he even coined this term as a red gold, that red gold can be produced between two Koreas. He signed, and Professor Han signed an MOU between different parties, between different countries, both governmental parties and NGOs. And he even managed to visit Pyongyang in 2018 and make a presentation and propose this project to North Korea, and they seem to be quite interested. So once again, if we depoliticized our efforts, if we make it win-win for everyone, because we can all win and we can all lose from climate change and environmental changes, if we depoliticize it, I think it's possible. And let's keep in mind that the more international effort, the more successful it can be, because the more interest is mingled together. And this particular project was stopped because of COVID and other developments, and also sanctions and so on. But it was nice to see this bottom up, from the ground, interest and possibility to engage in North Korea and address certain problems that are present there and also globally. Yes, this is the official proposal of the project, the international arrangement to produce red seaweed between the North and South Korea on the Yellow Sea. I will stop here, and I'm happy to take some questions and take part in discussion later on. Thank you very much.
Thanks for your presentation. 보스케 교수님의 이제 이 발표를 들었습니다. 여러분도 아시다시피 이제 북한 같은 경우에 많은 이제 그 동안의 정치적 어떤 행위라든지 어떤 경제적 빈곤함 때문에 이 생태계가 많이 훼손이 됐고 그 자연 환경도 많이 손상이 됐었죠. 특히 이제 2010년도 이후에 나타난 이런 그 홍수로 인해서 많은 사람들이 또 죽어 나가고 했지만, 현재 이제 김정은 체제에 들어와서 다시 이제 그 산림을 이제 녹지화 정책에 의해서 많이 어느 부분 이제 그 회복되고 있다라는 어떤 그런 증거도 제시를 했습니다. 아마 이제 이러한 그 북한의 변화에도 불구하고 사실 이제 남북 간에 있어서 기후 협력에 관한 거는 아직은 상당히 이제 많은 애로가 있을 거라는 점. 또 하나는 이제 그런 것들을
are under difficult situations. And also, in order to overcome such problems, we do need collaboration not only amongst North and South Korea, but also other neighboring countries. You gave us an example of the seaweed, so probably we can have the international cooperation system on this part as well. That will be a very important resource for the cooperation between the North and South Korea. Thank you very much for your input. Without further ado, I'd like to now invite the next presenter, Dr. Na Yong-woo from Korea Institute for National Unification. Dr. Na is a research fellow in the KINU, and he's going to give us the presentation on the Green Korean Peninsula Initiative with the neutrality of carbon in Korea. So we'd like to welcome him. Thank you very much. Thank you for the warm introduction. As was introduced, my name is Na Yong-woo. I am working at the Humanitarian and Cooperation Research Division in Korea Institute for National Unification. To introduce myself, as I was asked, I am normally working on the exchanges and cooperations between North and South Korea. When I was working on the thesis for my degree, I was working on the energy issue as well. So my topic also includes the energy, climate changes, and many other areas. And also recently, I happened to have the opportunity to be involved in the Green New Deal. So I was asked to be a part of the Green New Deal. So in the meantime, I was also given this opportunity to make a presentation in this event. So I was very happy to present my research outcome. Thank you very much for inviting me. This is a very meaningful event. So I'd like to thank the staff of the Net Zero 2020 organization. So my presentation today will cover the Green Korean Peninsula Initiative and the carbon neutrality in Korea. Carbon neutrality is kind of familiar word for everyone in Korea. It will be very meaningful and significant for all the Koreans. Also, the government has been working on the many initiatives and plans for the carbon neutrality. For example, by 2050, carbon neutrality is the policy goal of this administration. So that is all well known to the general public. In the meantime, what worried me or what concerned me the most is the fact that the carbon neutrality plan initiated by the government is to link with the climate change. That is to counteract the climate change proactively and very aggressively. Korea is not the only country in the world. All the countries are joining their hands to tackle this issue. So is it really possible for us to achieve this goal? And that is the question mark, the very big question mark. As I will be elaborating in the future, our plans are quite concrete, and they are worked in the way that the possibility can be further enhanced. However, I still have some concerns. Is it really possible for us to do this alone? This carbon neutrality is something that we can achieve alone. What occurred to me in my mind is the concept of Green Korean Peninsula. I just came up with this idea. Let me elaborate on that in more detail. I didn't prepare any PowerPoint presentation, so I'm just going to have the verbal explanation. Please understand. When we started to have this negotiation on the carbon neutrality, the first thing that came to our mind is, as you know, the first international agenda by Biden administration after taking oath was the climate change and the summit meeting for the climate in April. That drew the attention of the globe. Also, that became a trend that cannot be reverted all across the countries. Korea also has the plan to achieve by 2030, according to the current plan, the carbon reduction and the greenhouse gas reduction will be reduced by 30% by 2030, and that plan has been submitted to the UN. In case of Korea, as before, as mentioned by Dr. Rosuki earlier, we were not actually the part of the compulsory countries for this reduction. In my recollection, Korea was not in the group of all the advanced countries to have the mandatory reduction. I was happy and rejoicing at that time myself with many reasons. However, the Republic of Korea has been more proactive later on to initiate their own plan to have the reduction. So reduction efforts have been expressed on the initiative by the Korean government, and that requires big attention. What I would like to talk about today is the reason why Korean government has changed its stance to be more proactive than passive regarding this climate change. So after explaining the reason why, then I'm going to also talk about the content and the goals of the carbon neutrality. And then also I'll be talking about, in that case, how can we possibly cooperate with the North in this regard. So that will be my structure of this presentation. Climate change, as you know, is linked with the security. So sometimes we call it climate security. Actually, the word security can be added to any word, like human security is one of the examples. When you talk about the security, you might have the idea of the war or damage. But nowadays, we have every kind of security. For example, energy security and public security and so on. Therefore, we have a lot of security ideas here, and that is because of the changes of the government systems or the nation systems. The states in the past have been guaranteeing all the security for the individuals. The life and livelihood of the people were protected by the states in the past. So the private security and national security were the same thing in the past. However, after going through the historical changes in the modern society, this single identity of the personal and national security were separated. Therefore, we now have a different security for the human beings on an individual basis and the security for the states separately. So we now have this awareness in the modern society, and that is why we have a lot of other types of security. Security is for the livelihood of people, and who is going to protect my security? Against what? And against what factors? That would be a very important philosophical idea as well. In this regard, the climate change, as it was in the past, was also a sub-issue, sub-topic of the environmental issues. However, according to the report of UNDP in 1990, as part of the various types of security, environmental security was first mentioned. So that was also a part of the climate change at that time. And recently, as Dr. No Byung-yeol mentioned earlier, there are a lot of abnormalities of the climate situations all across the world. We are observing what is wrong in the earth. In this process, we are starting to call it a crisis, not just a climate change. It is a climate crisis that is affecting our lives directly. That is why we came up with the idea of climate security. As also mentioned by other speakers, we do have the 1.5 degree special report submitted by IPCC. It means that the BAU, business as usual, for the carbon production will lead to the 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees, or more of the global temperature. What we are trying to aim is to keep it under 1.5 degrees for the growth of the temperature. And that has been adopted, especially around European countries, that have been also giving the impact to the rest of the world. It was actually some time ago, not recent one. It has been some time. But nowadays, we see the full-scale development of this movement now. Why is that? Probably that's because of the change of power in the United States. They used to have the Trump administration, but the Trump administration's idea is that America first is the thing that have to be keeping, and also the climate change is something that is blocking the U.S. being the number one in the world. So that is why Trump had declared to get out of Paris Agreement. However, with the Biden administration, President Biden just subverted all the decisions by Trump. So the notification and many other ideas have been changed from the Trump administration. The first thing he did after taking oath was to get back into Paris Agreement in April, and he was part of the summit meeting for the climate as President of the United States. So the U.S. says that by 2030, they're going to reduce the level of the greenhouse gas to 50 to 52% of the level of 2005. That was the suggestion submitted by the United States. So if you compare this with the Obama administration wanted to take the leadership in the climate changes, and that was the twice the ambitious goal than the Obama administration. However, a question occurred to me. Why did he do that? Why did Biden do these things? Only because he wants to just obliterate the legacies of Trump? Maybe that is one of the reasons. But why? What else? So why is that he wanted to choose the climate change system? I think there are three reasons. The first of all, in the Trump administration, the U.S. and at the global arena had weakened the moral authority. America First was very egoistic, part of the U.S. philosophy, and they weakened the global hegemony accordingly. And Biden might have wanted to restore the authority at the global stage. That is the vision of the U.S. now. Second reason is as follows. The competition against China has been very tightened under Trump administration. The rivalry was aggravated. After Biden was in, many people wanted to know what would happen. And Biden also wanted to keep the balance of power with China, just like Trump did. However, what he did differently from Trump was that he wanted to have a multilateral system in controlling or containing China. One of the ways to do this is the climate change system, and then he wants to take the U.S. wants to take the leadership over this with China. The third one is the economic stagnation can be overcome with this new growth engine. One of the happenings in the U.S. is the carbon border adjustment and carbon tax as well. I'm going to elaborate on these things later on. These things will be helpful for protecting their own industries in the U.S. And companies and corporations can be also taking the leadership in the market in the global arena. So that will be affecting very positively to those companies. So in the transition toward carbon neutrality, the U.S. wants to maintain the leadership. So these are the three reasons, what I think, about why Biden reverted the stance of the U.S. Now, what about Korea? In more detail, for the last 30 years, we have witnessed that 1.4 degrees have been increased for the last 30 years. Accordingly, we are seeing the damages of the floods and abnormal climate changes. According to the statistics of the meteorological stations, the average annual temperature of Korea has been increased by 0.8 degrees for the year. And also, if it is going this way without having any further efforts to curb down under BAU by 2010, according to the analysis, Korea will have the 1.4 to 4.7 degrees Celsius coming up, and the temperature that is much higher than the world average by 2100. So that might not be seen for us at the moment, but in actuality, it will be a grave problem. That is why this government wants to have the consensus on the national level in terms of the carbon neutrality, and it has to do that. Regarding the detailed plans for the carbon neutrality, I can show you the data rather than me talking. So you have some diagrams in your booklet. So I'm going to now move to talk about the Green Korean Peninsula Initiative. Actually, we can be sufficing with our own plans and actions and implementations. However, nevertheless, we also have to think of the Korean Peninsula as well because we are connected geographically with the north as well. We are not free from the impact from the north either. Therefore, in order to realize the true sense of carbon neutrality, cooperation with the north is a must, especially when it comes to the climate change. We do have three significances. As mentioned by the previous speaker, Professor Bierburski, he said that the climate change is really important for the Korean Peninsula, and I really agree with that. However, without the international aid or cooperation, we cannot achieve this goal. And also North Korea, if it wants to, even if it wants to do something, it requires the assistance from other countries as well. So if South Korea is helpful for North Korea to achieve their goal in the climate change, we can really achieve the big goal. Secondly, from our perspective, from South Korea's perspective, we can realize the 2030 goal NDC more concretely. In addition to that, we can be more proactive in the global arena with the leadership of achieving this goal along with the North Korea. Last but not least, we can also have the Korean Peninsula peace process, which is in the deadlock nowadays, that can be also reactivated with this Green Korean Peninsula Initiative. So let's go deeper into this. North Korea has been very negative in this regard very much in the past. However, when we also look at the international arena for bilateral meetings, North Korea has been active in meeting with other countries one by one, although it is not emerging in the international arena as a whole. And also after the Kim Jong-un leadership, the new renewable energy law was adopted in the North Korea in 2010, and also that has been very concrete in the ideas. The climate change actions are not just rhetoric in North Korea, therefore. But we also have to say that North Korea wants to be self-reliant and also self-fulfilling in their energy law. That is because they cannot literally have any collaboration with other countries. They want to just concentrate their efforts and resources for this matter internally. And also North Korea is wanting help from other countries. We can see the evidence here in 2008 when it accessed to the Paris Agreement. The NDC was also part of it. So national deterministic contribution was also said that the 8% can be achieved for the reduction. However, North Korea had also conditions for that. If there is an international assistance, they can achieve more than 40% instead of 8% for the reduction as part of the NDC. That evidences that North Korea is really wanting international assistance and cooperation. Another thing that we have to look at is the CDM, the that is really related to the carbon reduction system. So we are constantly looking at this possibility. And also North Korea is also looking at the reduction of the carbon emissions. And if we work together with the North, then we can effectively reduce the carbon emissions. And I'm sure that the North Korea is much interested in that as well. That is really possible, as I say here, is that because we see the global trend in many of the world regarding the carbon neutrality, that is irrevertible trend that we see all across the world. And also InterKorean Cooperation for the climate change can attract many of the countries' acceptance. Secondly, as North Korea mentioned, for the climate issues at least, international cooperation is something that they really want. Thirdly, internally in South Korea, the Green New Deal has to be successful. Also, carbon neutrality is a must that we have to have. The public acceptance is growing in South Korea as well. Now, we have to deal with the more concrete ideas on how is the issue, but we do have the foundation why we have to start these initiatives. Now is the time for us to be more concrete in our actions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Now, through your presentation, and also as mentioned by Professor Vyacheslav, North Korea, in order to address climate change, North Korea does have the will. However, for the implementation, North Korea is lack of capacity, and therefore the support from the international community is critical. And also, Dr. Na touched upon the fact that for the non-political sectors, the cooperation, the North Korea's will and the commitment was always important. So how much North Korea has the commitment to cooperate with South Korea and the other international communities? This is something that we, I think, have to delve into. Now, as for the last presentation for this session, Dr. Kim Yong-gun will give us the presentation, and he's actually joining us online. Dr. Kim, he is a renowned scholar in environment issues and also the climate change. And he's serving as the director of the Net Zero 2050 Foundation. So we'll hear from Dr. Kim, and after that, we are going to have Q&A session and general discussion. Dr. Kim, are you ready? The floor is yours. Thank you very much for your kind introduction. I am from the Korea Environment Institute, and my name is Kim Yong-gun. In fact, our organization was previously named as Korea Environment Assessment Institute, but recently it got renamed. For about 30 years, I have been studying the carbon markets as well as policies in climate change, and I also participate in IPCC as the co-author, and currently the sixth report is now underway. I'm also involved in the drafting of the sixth report. What I like to talk about today, I think it's pretty similar to the previous presentations. I would like to talk about the future direction of InterKorean Cooperation to achieve carbon neutrality on the Korean Peninsula. As you know, climate change remains very high on global agenda. So today, I would like to talk about the four things. And I will skip the things that may be duplicated with the previous presentations. As you know, climate change is a serious issue. It affects everyone and every country. And therefore, most of the countries have come up with their goals for carbon neutrality by 2050. Europe is leading the way. They have announced the European Green Deal, and they announced that by 2050, it's going to achieve the net zero emission. And the US is also following suit. So during the Trump administration, they actually withdrew themselves from the Paris Accord, but then with the Biden administration, they returned to Paris Accord and they strengthened the GHG reduction target. China and also other developing countries, in the past, they were pretty reluctant and lackluster in responding to climate change, and they only emphasized the responsibility of advanced nations. But today, China is joining forces, and they also came up with their own carbon neutrality goal. And Japan, in order to become the world's first decarbonization society, they also promised that they are going to redouble their efforts. And also they announced a plan to have 100% EV for new car sales. And the UK, you see that by 2035, they said that they are going to achieve the carbon neutrality in power generation sector. What about Norway? By 2025, only 4 times after, you see, that Norway is planning to ban the sales of the cars with internal combustion engines. And not just central government, already a lot of multinational companies, they have already achieved the carbon neutrality, or they have come up with the Scope 3 carbon neutrality, which means that not just the companies themselves, but also the partners on the supply chain will also be forced to achieve carbon neutrality. So A lot of companies have joined this initiative. Germany, they came up with the climate protection law. And if the carbon reduction target is not strong enough, the Constitutional Court said that it's the violation of the climate protection law. And also international organizations such as IEA has come up with the 2050 Natural Global Energy Roadmap. Korea also announced the NDC target to the UNFCCC, and they promised that the most of the power generation and electricity will use clean resources, and Korea is going to implement various energy efficiency programs utilizing its excellent digital smart technology. And Carbon Neutrality Committee is now up and running, and this committee is now devising more specific scenarios to achieve carbon neutrality target of Korea. And recently, they actually came up with some scenarios. And what's more important than 2050 is the target for 2030. And Korea has already submitted the NDC by 2030, but it's now trying to strengthen the 2030 target, and it's going to resubmit the NDC target to the UN. So as you know, the carbon neutrality, it's a big global trend. And how Korea should respond to this trend. Let's first take a look at Korea's strength and weakness. As you may be aware, Korea already launched the ETC market back in 2015. And in fact, the market cap of this ETC is at the world-class level. Recently, the carbon price in Korea decreased, whereas the carbon price in other countries increased. But Korea used to be the world's largest carbon market. And also, the carbon pricing has become an important issue. Especially a lot of countries are engaged in the comparison assessment with the adoption of carbon tax, and the OECD said that Korea has pretty good carbon pricing system. This is because of the ETC market. And as you know, Korea is excellent and world-class powerhouse in IT, electricity, as well as the battery industries, which gives a lot of advantages to Korea. And however, Korea also has several weaknesses. So renewable energy is very important, but since Korea has a small land and therefore we have limited potentials for the generation of renewable energy, and energy intensity as well as the reliance on trade is very high in Korea, and this actually puts Korea in a disadvantaged position for competition against the carbon. And also the carbon market, yes, it's very big in size, but its internal function, I think that there are a lot of distortions. For example, like due to the government excessive intervention and also wrong market rules, you see that although we have a big carbon market, however, turnover rate is less than 1/100th of the EU. So Korea does have a big market cap. However, the market is not active at all. So these are the weaknesses. What about opportunities? In this era of the carbon neutrality, the fossil fuel will become useless, and the price of fossil fuel will decline dramatically. But then this will give the Korea an opportunity to enjoy better conditions for trade, because Korea has heavily relied on fossil fuels, and Korea imported a lot of fossil fuels. But in the future, Korea can actually import fossil fuels almost at no cost. And then Korea will have a lot of profits, and these profits must be utilized for the development of renewable energy. And you can see that renewable energy, it's not 100% imported, and therefore, in fact, the carbon neutrality and all these trends can give huge opportunities and benefit to Korea. And also, we are expecting huge growth in electricity, battery, and also the hydrogen car markets, and Korea has a strong position and presence in this market. and also fine dust and air pollution. As you know, many of these pollution originate from China, and China is actually joining forces for tackling climate change, and therefore, again, this could benefit Korea. However, there are also threats. Recently, we can see that the green protectionism is now raising its ugly head, and some economists, such as the Nordhaus, they said they proposed to form the climate club to impose all-out tariff retaliation to prevent incentives, including free riding. So you can see that the environment protection is very likely to be abused as a means for protectionism. And also a lot of countries are trying to impose carbon tax, and they are trying to form climate club. And Korea also has a bad image. It's notorious as a climate villain, which will again become a threat to Korea. And because Korea has a lot of coal-related assets, and these will be stranded in the future. So these will be the threats for Korea. And here you can see the result of my modeling analysis, and I tried to calculate the economic benefit and loss from the global carbon price policy. And as I said earlier, Korea does have an excellent HR resources. Korea is poorly endowed with fossil fuel, but in the era of carbon neutrality, human resources will become important, whereas the fossil fuels will become useless. And in that sense, I believe carbon neutrality will give us a lot of positive opportunities. And here you can see the global trend in carbon price market. So carbon price will heavily affect the global economy in the future. And you can see that the EU GTS market is actually increasing. The price is soaring, whereas the Korea is experiencing a nosediving. Why? As we move toward the carbon neutrality, carbon price should inevitably go up. But because of the market distortion issue, Korea is actually experiencing a dip and decline in carbon price. So here you can see that the trade volume is very minimal despite very high market capitalization. In order to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, we need to have a scientifically proven, well-designed policies. Today, you see that the coals and nuclears, these have been heavily politicized, and I don't think this is beneficial for Korea. IPCC, they emphasize the importance of scientific evidence. Scientific evidence means that you have to have a scientifically proven target, but once you set the targets, you have to let the market do the rest of the work. But as you know, Korea, you can see that the Korean government is heavily involved in the energy market, causing a lot of distortion, especially electricity dispatch. This market has been heavily distorted in Korea. And even with the rapid development in ETS, coal is treated as a separate sector. So I think that this is a sort of the wrongful government intervention, the example of the problems with the government intervention. And if this situation remains unchanged, then Korea will lose the carbon warfare, let's say. So if we could normalize the carbon market, I believe that Korea has all the strengths to take leadership in this field. Especially Korea is well positioned to serve as a hub for carbon trade and carbon market. And therefore, the Korean government should make all-out efforts to grow this field. Now, with regards to the InterKorean Cooperation, yes, North and South Koreas, they have to join hands together to develop renewable energy to achieve carbon neutrality on the Korean Peninsula. As you know, electricity supply in North Korea represents only 3 to 4% of the electricity provided to South Korea. So in order to ensure normal economic development in North Korea, they have to have much higher electricity supply than today. However, they cannot simply rely on the import of coal. In order to be aligned with our goal for carbon neutrality, both South and North Korea, they have to rely on PV and solar power and other renewable energy resources. And as you know, North Korea does have much more renewable energy resources than South Korea because it has more natural resources, it has larger land, it has stronger sunlight, stronger wind, and also land price of North Korea is extremely cheap. And therefore, rather than installing the PV infrastructure in South Korea, if we could establish these renewable energy infrastructure in North Korea and integrate them into the electricity grid, then that will be an excellent measure for renewable energy development. So in terms of the potential, in fact, North Korea has even greater potential than South Korea. So if we establish the infrastructure and also invest money and in North Korea, then I think that this could create a win-win situation for both North and South Korea to achieve carbon neutrality. And CDM, it disappeared today. And also the negotiations for Paris Accord, has been expanded. And I believe that the carbon will be traded and the carbon credits will gain importance only. And therefore, if we could utilize the potential of the North Korea, then I think we can have massive amount of credits for carbon emission. And you know, the carbon price is already over $100, though the Korea's carbon price is pretty low. So if we could utilize the North Korea's potential, in fact, we can gain the economic benefit of 135 trillion won every year. And therefore, we really have to muster our wisdom and strength together in order to tap in this huge potential that North Korea can provide. So I believe that in pursuing economic cooperation project with North Korea, the first priority that South Korea pursue should be the renewable energy sector. Of course, the EIA and other basic monitoring have to be conducted, but with these projects, we can expand the renewable energy development efforts in North Korea, and we can share the benefit of these projects between South and North Korea. Then this will enhance the growth potential on the Korean Peninsula as a whole. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was Dr. Kim Yong-gun from the Korea Environment Institute to talk about the efforts made by the global community for the climate change and how we, Korea, can cooperate with the renewable energy. Pros and cons have been fully analyzed by his remark, especially when it comes to the North Korea. As you know very well, they have the nuclear development issues and the freezing issues of the reactors of the nuclear things, and they have the problems of the power consumption to a great degree. In order to also complement their shortage of the power, they naturally have to be interested in the renewable energy production and the conservation of the resources. Therefore, this will work as a trigger for our collaboration in the future. So far, we have been hearing from the three presenters. Now is the time for us to have the discussion. So we have now three discussants invited here, so each of the discussants can have their comment and questions. Also, we have our discussants. I'm going to now introduce them to you. First of all, we have Dr. Hong Seok-kun, research fellow at the Korean Institute for National Unification and is now a professor at Changwon University. Recently moved there, so congratulations to your new work. Now we also have Dr. Kim Il-gi of the Institute for National Security Strategy. Last but not least, we have Professor Kim Hyung-soo of Dankook University, who is also very much a renowned scholar for the InterKorean Cooperation. So discussion today will be done mostly by these discussants, but we're not going to designate any person in order. We're going to have a very free discussion amongst themselves so that we can have free exchanges of ideas. But we will start also first by the order that is presented in your booklet. So I'd like to now ask Dr. Hong to be the first discussant. Are you there? Thank you very much. So can I start my discussion? Yes, you are the first one. So would you like to start with your self-introduction before having your 10-minute discussion points? But you can take all your ideas to all the presenters or any one of the presenters. Thank you very much. As was introduced, my name is Hong Seok-kun. I used to work at the KINU, but from today, this is my first day in the campus. So I'm now a professor at the Chungdeok University. Thank you very much for your giving me the congratulations. And also, I used to work with the KINU, and also I've been also involved in the Net Zero 2050 Climate Foundation, which I'm very grateful for having this event for us. Renewable energy has been discussed by Dr. Kim Yong-gun, and these are very important things that we have to work on. I believe that these are key points for our cooperation with the North in the future. As for the climate change, as mentioned by Biden administration, as soon as they are taking power, that was the #1 issue in the world, and also they are trying their utmost in order to tackle the climate change. China is also changing its position, and the SDG, Sustainable Development Goal, was also accepted by China in the VNR. That also signifies the importance of the climate change, and probably we can actually find a breakthrough of the relationship with the North. This is our hope. Since we are talking about the climate change, I also would like to mention the remark by Dr. Bielski. Thank you very much for your explanation about what's happening in the North Korea. Also, Dr. Na Yong-woo has been giving us the Korean Peninsula peace process and also the new ideas of the Korean Peninsula climate green initiatives. And also they have also the community for the peace has been mentioned by many the people so far. However, the COVID-19 has been blocking all of these initiatives as we see now. But we cannot just sit idle. We have to take this opportunity to do further. Maybe this is the opportune time for us to start discussing these ideas now. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. North Korea has been passive in the climate change in the past, but has been changing its stance. Now it's getting more and more proactive. So what I think here at this point is that we have the stalemate of the relationship with the North. In the political area, is it really possible for us to have the cooperation in the climate change? That was my starting question. So starting with this question of mine, I also had to ask myself whether the initiatives by the North is genuine or not. Can we really believe it or not? Is it really possible to have the collaboration? And I also heard that there is some kind of the collaboration going on nowadays, and probably my thinking is that there might be some assistance between the two as well. In Vietnam and also in Southeast Asia, we talked about the climate change, environmental issues. I've been also talking with the NGOs from other countries, especially from Germany. We had a 1-week meeting and conference to discuss those things. What I overheard from them is that North Korea has been really active in this climate change, and only the timing was the issue. The North Korea wanted to be very active in terms of the cooperation with the rest of the world. As Dr. Kim's PowerPoint presentation mentioned this, I was able to see that they were doing something about this. So because of the nuclear issue by the North, everything was going to shut. So all the negotiations were just walked away. However, I see some changes in this stance as well. If I may add a little bit more on this, in the Korean Peninsula issue, the carbon neutrality and climate issues are something beyond the Korean Peninsula. Actually, this is related to the humanity, the rest of the world. I believe that the North Korea can be more active and aggressive in this regard. We do have special relationship between the North and South Korea, but can we really reside in there only? No, I don't want to do that. I just want to get beyond this shackle of the relationship. Probably that is why we need to have the multilateral negotiations and multilateral cooperations, especially for the carbon neutrality. Dr. Na has been very expressive about this. Also, the commitment for the carbon neutrality has been also addressed in April this year, and the Green New Deal was also announced in order to reduce the consumption of the emissions. In the North Korean cases, the greenhouse gas plan has been actually announced in 2016 and submitted to the UN for the first round, and the second round of the changes was submitted to UN, saying that they're going to have the reduction of the 36 million tons. Sustainable Development Goals (SDG) by UN have been also being accepted by the North Korea partially, as we see here. That is why we need to start the multilateral negotiations. So North Korea will not be just isolated on this matter. So what I think also here is that not just between North and South Korea, the Southeast and East Asian countries and also Northeast Asian countries need to cooperate together. Actually, I've seen some progress in the cooperations amongst these countries in Asia. So North Korea has been participating in some of the conferences there, and GTI, the Grand Two-Man Initiative, was also attracting North Korea's attention, that it actually participated in the conference. Of course, because of the COVID-19, the progress has not been made yet afterwards. But when we talk about the restoration issues or the climate environment issues and all deforestation pest issues, as well as the climate energy issues, they have been also part of the plans in the past, although they're not put into action because of the COVID-19. Since we see the evidence in 2016, they also actually initiated some of the initiatives, for example, the 1,000 Step initiatives or the World Vision's program for North Korea has been also in practice. Many of the NGOs have been visiting North Korea to have the projects together on the environmental issues. I was able to witness those activities that were really going on. I've been elaborating all these examples, but I really believe that this is the time for us to start multilateral negotiations. So different from the past, North Korea is changing its position. That would be a very good opportunity. However, on the other hand, it can be bad news as well. So bad news includes that we have the humanitarian aid programs that is away from the political issues might make us believe that cannot be successful because of the political situations. Every time we try to do something, political situations have prevented us from going further. That was also example in the past what had happened between our two countries. Even though we start to have the negotiations with them on the environmental issues, every time the politics was a problem. So since we have Dr. Wierzbowski, I'd like to have a question to you, Dr. Wierzbowski. I know that the PNR has been made, so North Korea has been expressing its attitude to be a part of it. But we are in a very difficult political situation amid this situation and also the COVID situation. Have you heard of anything that is going on with the North Korea that is really counteracting the climate changes inside? So if you know any latest news, please share that with us. That was my first question. And also I have another question, second question. Currently we have the COVID-19 issues and also nuclear issues. We have disconnected relationship between North and South Korea. In this stance that the NGOs, they all about the multilateral negotiations or relationships, do you have any insight for what we can do with the NGOs included, with the multilateral negotiations? Do you have any opinion on that, what we can do? I'd like to have your insight on that. So I learned a lot today from your presentations. I will try to continue to have this interest alive for me so that I can be very active in these researches. So I'm fully committed to that. So thank you very much for answering my questions.
Thank you very much. So he pointed out the several practical issues. While listening to the three presentations, I also felt that we can ask this same common question, that as for the issues that have nothing to do with politics, but they have often been disrupted and disconnected because of the politics. Especially, let's say we need the multilateral cooperation to respond to climate changes. However, North Korea is now under sanction because of the nuclear program. And therefore, people are worrying that their efforts for climate change response can be subject to the violation of the sanctions, and this could limit the efforts that we can engage in. So regarding that, I hope that Professor Thomas Wierzbowski can share his insight. Now, moving on, we will hear from Kim Il-gi from the Institute for National Security Strategy. Good morning. I am Kim Il-gi, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for National Security Strategy, as introduced. Currently, I'm working in the Neo-Security Office in our institute. When we say neo-security, it's about the environment, natural disaster, water resources, renewable energy, climate change, as well as epidemics like COVID-19. And we also deal with cybersecurity issues as well. I studied the North Korea politics, and the reason I work for this neo-security office in our institute is because I was asked to further my researches on neo-security issues with North Korea, in North Korea. What I'd like to present today is that regarding the international matters, I think the other three speakers already elaborate on that. So I'm not going to touch on that, but rather I will focus on Korean Peninsula and also the climate change as well as the neo-security issues that North Korea is facing. First, since the Kim Jong-un took power, North Korea shows greater interest in climate change and other neo-security issues. In particular, through the New Year's speech or through important anniversaries, they make official announcements for like afforestation movement and climate change response, or sometimes they enact a new law and expressing their commitment to pursuing the environmental campaign. So compare with the Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-un era, yes, Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il era, the Kim Jong-un has come up with more diverse measures for climate change response and environmental challenges. But the problem is that their official announcement is pretty different from what actually happened in the field. In other words, North Korea, officially, they're making a lot of propaganda, and also they announce various policies, but oftentimes these policies are grand only in rhetoric. When it comes to climate change and neo-security issues, the North Korea has implemented the policies mainly in two fronts. First, domestically, North Korea does have a sort of the all-out campaign. So to tackle natural disaster as well as the epidemics, North Korea has poured all its natural resources to tackle the issues. And climate change, carbon neutrality, or the renewable energy, for these issues, domestically, North Korea is not really well positioned to implement any kind of policies. So North Korea announces the policy directions officially, but in reality, North Korea has to rely on international community and their support. Without that, they cannot really implement any kind of domestic policies for climate change and so on. Because they're under economic sanction, and also now we are living in an era of COVID-19. Then, why does North Korea mention about the environment issues and forestation that frequently? It's because of the Kim Jong-un. You see, they're not just the environment and climate change issues. Even in other fronts and other issues, Kim Jong-un wants to make North Korea a normal country or member of the international community. So in a lot of non-political issues and agenda, Kim Jong-un showed his commitment to normalize North Korea. And also, when it comes to neo-security issues, including climate change, we are focusing on Korean Peninsula right now. And so as for South Korea and North Korea, when pursuing economic cooperation, we have to think about at what level we have to pursue economic cooperation, whether it's between the two Koreas or whether it's in the Asia-Pacific level. So in order for North and South Koreas to pursue the cooperation in neo-security issues on the Korean Peninsula, of course, the cooperation in the Asia-Pacific region is a precondition that has to be fulfilled. And because of the political instability right now, we have to think about how much possibility does this cooperation have. And also, is it really possible to have the InterKorean Cooperation focusing on climate change? Korea, we are talking about the live community on the Korean Peninsula. So it talks about the restoration of the ecosystem and effective responses against the epidemics and infectious disease. And South Korea has come up with several proactive proposals, but North Korea's response is very reluctant and lackluster. So for climate change and renewable energy, when South Korea makes a lot of proposals to North Korea, how much favorable response we can get from North Korea? I think that's the key issue. As you know, the North Korea, their focus is always on political issues. And other issues are always put on the back burner. But as we may have seen from Germany's case, so before their unification, through the basic agreement mechanism, East and West Germany's cooperated to respond to the natural disaster and other unpolitical issues. So I think that we have to learn the lessons from the Germany's case. So we have to have some basic agreements in place in order to pursue full swing cooperation on these areas with North Korea. So South Korea does have a basic law for the development of inter-Korean relations, but the law doesn't really deal with the topics that we are discussing today. And therefore, we have to amend the law, and we have to create the right conditions for cooperation with North Korea. And in that sense, I would like to ask a question to Dr. Na Yong-woo. You talked about the Green Korean Peninsula policy, and you briefly mentioned about that. But when we raise the issue of Green Korean Peninsula, how much can it be accepted by North Korea? And in order to persuade North Korea, what areas we have to highlight and focus? And that's my question to Dr. Na.
감사합니다.
Thank you very much. Since he is responsible for the national strategy as a whole and the Institute for National Security Strategy, he is thinking up of an idea that we cannot formulate normally. So he has been talking about very wide-reaching ideas with the proper question. Last but not least, my next discussant will be Professor Kim Hyung-soo of Dankook University. Would you like to start now? Yes. Thank you very much. As was introduced, my name is Kim Hyung-soo, professor at Dankook University. I am a professor of public administration. As was introduced, I am also chairman of the Northeast Asia Culture Community, and I am actually a person of studying the culture administration. I am interested in the local communities and local governments administration. I've been expanding my areas of research to the diplomacy as well. And that there I met the idea of the inter-Korean relations. So I'm incorporating all these ideas together. Recently, along with Dr. Na Yong-woo, I've been also working on the concept of the space for the public security. I've been now working on a thesis with the commission made by the administration office. We've been also working on what kind of measures can be taken for the disasters in the border of the North and South Korea. That is why I am here today, maybe. So that has been my self-introduction. So let's start this way. In the Middle East nowadays, we have a lot of repercussions of the stories and news to us as well. More recently, we have the issue of the Afghanistan, and going back into the further history, we have the Syrian refugee issues in the past. So agricultural administration people have been also saying that all these Middle East issues have been starting from the issues of the agriculture, and more deeply that was a result coming out of the climate changes. So they say that climate change is connected with the refugee issues. Earlier, we've been hearing other speakers about the carbon neutrality. The IPCC and other NGO panels have been talking about the neutrality of the carbon. I am in full agreement with that. I am not diagnosed of that. Here, we are here to talk about the unification issue, and also we have the organizer, Net Zero 2050 Climate Foundation. At a glance, I was wondering what kind of relationship can there be between the Climate Foundation and the unification. The first thing in my mind that came to me was that politicization has been made already of the climate issues. And other the speakers have been already talking about this. I'd like to skip some of their ideas. But from the perspective of the countries, especially from EU, and after the EUR, Uruguay round was there, and Green round will be the next one that is coming to us. So the advanced countries' economic viewpoint have been politicized nowadays, so that the politics and economy are intermingled today. That is my agony that I see nowadays in the world. One of the most important expressions from Dr. Na's presentation was about the climate regime. There were for the commons, but they're all common, but that is what he expressed. So we have to have the common but differentiated positions to be responsible in our own way. So under the grand theme of the climate change. On the other hand, we do have the responsibility of the joint global issues, but on the other hand, climate responsibility cannot be disregarded either. Therefore, the reason I'm talking about this at the start is because when it comes to the inter-Korean relations, North Korea has been described as being very aggressive in the past, but now they are changing their stance. They are very positive nowadays and proactive in terms of the climate issues in the global arena. Why is that? That's the first question we should have. Some other people also say this: the climate change cannot be explained scientifically, but for the 45.5 billion years ago, the Big Bang was starting. The life of the universe And also the history of the 4555, the book Sapiens by Yuval Harari also said that the beyond dinosaur era is only 20,000 years of history for the humanity. And also we've been knowing the history for the last 16,000 years only. So scientists say that throughout the big history of the universe, the humanity is only belonging to a very small edge of the history. And also the humanity will just destroy the world and the earth, and still the globe will be there, and the universe will not be destroyed by us. Therefore, probably we are just exaggerating the impact of the climate issues onto this issue. So what I'm saying here is that there are pros and cons, there are disagreements and agreements on the climate and issues as well. So we do have our stance from the perspective of the developing countries. Instead of developed countries, we have to link it with the job creation issues. Also at the national level, they have the agenda for creating the country, and also a lot of climate and environmental regimes that might be aggravating the legitimacy of the countries. So we cannot disregard those notions either. Second thing I'd like to say is that who is the culprit of this climate changes? The one and single person, did any one of you create this carbon emission, or did anyone ask you to do that? Was there any induction? Thinking this way, I can say that there are many actors like the persons, states, and corporations, and so on. One of them is corporations. They cannot just rule out their responsibility. Nowadays, we are going to cafes. We don't want to use the plastic things that they are giving us. These straws made of plastic is not something that we want, but they're made by the companies. So there's no way of just denying or refusing those plastic straws. And also we do have our issues concerned by other countries. KEPCO is now also working on the fossil fuel as well. European countries, on the other hand, have their large-scale investors who are making investment, who are now excluding investments in the KEPCO nowadays. So the big hands are actually doing something against our situation. So how can we solve these kind of environmental issues? That is why probably the ESG, environmental stability and governance, have been, society and governance has been on the horizon. Probably that is one of the series of the efforts to tackle with these issues as well. So we have the responsibility on the one hand as a part of the collectiveness, and also we have the responsibility as an individual. We want to have our good influence to the rest of the world and to the future. Now we have a reason to look at this at the perspective of the community as well. So on the one hand, we have the general theory of the international relations, and on the other hand, we have specific theory for a national development of each country. Relatively speaking, we have been disregarding the importance of the carbon neutrality so far. Now, the bucks are going to the individuals. So we are now given the responsibility and duty to deal with this. What can we do? What should we do as individuals? So we do have those kinds of different perspectives. So in terms of these responsibility, we have to think at least once, who is the responsible party? Now, let's talk about the inter-Korean relations. Having said that, Dr. Bielski also showed us a very vivid data that we Koreans could have not seen, especially the floods in the North Korea. Thank you very much for that. Recently, according to the Korean Meteorological Office, by the unit of a decade so far in Korea, every year we have the increase of the flood or the rainfall, like 10.7%. I don't know if that is because of the natural history or because of the artificial history. So we don't know yet. But as Dr. Bielski showed us, they have their realistic issues shown there. Exteriorly, they have these issues in there, but the biggest concern for them interiorly would be the deforestation of their mountains. According to recent data between the 2019-2020, they have their own 50% of the deforestation in the North Korea. It means that the increase of the deforestation is being made. According to the aerial pictures, especially in the Kaesong City and the south of the Pyeongnam and the south of Pyeongnam, they have the ravished mountains. And why is that? I think it's because of the raw materials for the energy, burning their fossil fuels for them. So the people are just cutting their trees in order to have the burning for their winter. So if you think of all these things, the climate issue negotiations should be focused on these things as well. So we need to have a new and different approach to deal with their problems in terms of energy. Recently, we have some questions regarding can we really consider the issue of the North Korea in this matter? And is it really a problem to South Korea as well? To answer to that question, I say that geographically we are connected. Flood in the North Korea can impact South Korea, and also the rainfall in this North Korea can also have the damage on the South Korea as well. The continuous conflicts have been made between the two countries, although they are not being reported by the news media. We know that there is a problem in the Haengdam Dam or Indang Dam. They sometimes have the floods making impact on the South Korea as well so far. So the experts know that. In order to tackle the stalemate issue between the two Koreas, the Unification Ministry has proposed the proposed issue of the new green initiatives. Starting with this event today, I hope that the stalemated relationship of North and South Korea can be reinvigorated with the central point of the climate issues very naturally. We know that we have been in the stalemate since Hanoi meeting. So this issue can be a part of the multilateral negotiations and collaborations. There also should be having the internal agreement inside North Korea. If we talk about the climate issue, they can easily move toward us to have the connection of the people, and also they can have the livelihood community for the Yangang area, which is close to the border area. And these community people can be also a part of the programs, and that will be a very slow but very initial starting point for the collaboration, making a inter-Korean community for the livelihood of the people. And that is very realistic suggestion to make. So I hope that this suggestion can have more room in the future for discussions and implementations. I do not have actually the questions to the presenters. What I'm here saying as my comment is that let's start, let's do it, and we need more sincere discussions, and that has been my discussion point. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kim. So Professor Kim, I think, touched upon more fundamental issues, the starting point for the inter-Korean cooperation. Now, from now on, we are going to have the Q&A session. And we have about 10 minutes before the end of this session. And there are several questions from the audience. Or rather, we don't really have questions from the audience. But there were some questions raised by our panelists. So now we will have the time for presenters to respond to the questions. So for Dr. Kim Yong-kwon, I want to add one more question. I want to raise a question. So the Dr. Kim, he talked about the great potential of North Korea for the generation of the renewable energy. And he said that if we could join hands together to utilize North Korea's great potential, then we can achieve the vision of Green Korean Peninsula. But the problem is that based on the three presentations and also all panelists' comments, you see that when it comes to the issues that have nothing to do with politics, still there are a lot of rooms for politicizing them. So, in other words, many of the issues can be politicized. For example, like the sports exchange, the private level exchange. You see, for decades, South Korea try hard to have the human exchanges with North Korea. However, whenever there was a political deadlock happening, then all of our efforts went down the drain. That was our previous experience. So Dr. Kim talked about the potential for the partnership for renewable energy development. North Korea does have a huge potential. South Korea has a great technology. So if these two can be mingled and married together, then this will lead to huge development and a lot of benefits for both South and North Korea. For example, like when it comes to resources, you see North Korea is richly endowed with natural resources, much more than South Korea. But in order to utilize them, yes, we talked a lot about how to utilize these resources, how to promote the economic cooperation, but none of them were actually translated into reality. So I want to know whether the Dr. Kim does have any idea for this. Now, starting from the Professor Thomas Wierzbowski and then the Dr. Kim and the Dr. Na, I would like to give you some time to respond to the questions that are raised to you.
If I may just jump into your question, Professor, not to Dr. Kim Yong-gon presentation about Pukhan Chancheonyok and Chesang Energy possibility in North Korea. There is something unique about North Korea, which are tidal power plants that can be built there. Korean Peninsula is unique in this matter because tides, the difference between high tide and low tide, especially in the Yellow Sea, is huge. And this technology is in South Korea, it's well known in South Korea, and could be discussed or implemented in North Korea. So not necessarily solar, but maybe those tidal power plants could be put on the table somewhere. I'm not sure I am able to answer Dr. Hong's question, but maybe I can confuse you even more. Three things: North Korean nuclear program, sanctions, and SDGs, and our efforts to achieve SDGs. On nuclear program, North Korea is a nuclear state. India is a nuclear state. Pakistan is a nuclear state. North Korea is a nuclear state, period. We have to move on. We have to start to live with that. India tested ICBMs multiple times in 2018, and we do not talk about it. Pakistan officially supported terrorism and is a nuclear state, and we do not necessarily talk about it. I think we should move on with nuclear program in North Korea. North Korea is a nuclear state. Sanctions. I saw sanctions on the ground. I was part of the project. We tried to deliver renewable energy-powered rice cookers, papsut, to North Korea. And we violated sanctions because there were some metal parts in it. One NGO that is especially close to me was trying to send nail clippers to North Korea. And it was sanction violation, nail clippers, because it was metal. Only recently, there was an attempt to reach North Koreans via Zoom. And I got a legal opinion that using Zoom with North Koreans is a sanction violation because it's an American technology. Let's look at ourselves first. And when I say ourselves, us, it's an international community. Where do we want to go with North Korea when we put sanctions on them and we are unable to send nail clippers and use Zoom? I'll stop here. Thank you.
예, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much. As for me, I also spent a little time to talk about this. Dr. Kim has been talking about the initiative that can be suggested to North Korea and how much is welcomed, or can it be welcomed, as his question. I do not see there is a big welcome from the North Korea yet at the moment. However, linking my idea with our moderator's speech, we do have the politicization issues of the non-political matters. While researching on the inter-Korean relations, always the blockade came from the sanctions. Everything was just related to the sanctions. It's like a black hole. Everything was absorbed into the issue of the sanctions because nothing can move farther from there. Is it really necessary for us to put the sanctions in there, regardless of the necessity of the sanctions? If we have to have the collaboration of an issue, we have to concentrate our efforts on that issue. in the politicized relations of the North and South Korea, everything will be politicized or has been politicized so far. No further discussion can move on. So just off the cuff, and I would say that the issue, making issues of the issues, that's the most important thing. So we have to concentrate on issues only. That's it for me. Last but not least, Dr. Kim Yong-gun, please.
So Dr. No gave us a very good question. Let me respond to that. I am not an expert in politics, but as far as I know, with regards to the climate change accord, there have been several activities going on. And North Korea pretty actively participate in this global movement, including the Kyoto Protocol, and these international mechanism talks about the joint implementation where countries can come together to achieve the targets. And the European countries have utilized this. So the 20 countries in Europe, they come together and create the EU bubble, and their achievements are assessed as a one block. So in that sense, I think that Korea can also utilize this joint implementation mechanism. So South and North Korea can be assessed as one block. And by promoting the joint implementation, I believe that we can avoid the sanctions. So I hope that we can kickstart this process so South Korea can make a proposal of joint implementation to North Korea. And North Korea does have the NDC target by 2050. And therefore, if we could suggest North Korea to discuss ways for joint implementation, and once it is realized, then I think it's going to be a permanent institution that we can utilize forever. And also, Dr. Thomas, you talked about the tidal power, and I think this is a brilliant idea. So not just the solar, we have to focus on tidal energy as well. Thank you very much.
We've been talking about very important issues. Nevertheless, time is our enemy. We're not given enough time to talk all about these things. I have to declare the ending of this session as a moderator. I'm very sorry to do this. However, with these presentations and discussions, although our road is far away to our destination, we have to be reminding ourselves of the importance of the climate issue, which is not just the Korean issue, but also the global issue. We also have to deal with this issue along with the North Korea as well, because it's not just the South Korean issue only. We have been palpating the possibility of having the new round of cooperation on this matter. So I thank you very much for your ardent participation, all the presenters and discussants. Last but not least, I also would like to thank Dr. Hong, who is an organizer, and Dr. Che of the Net Zero 2050 Climate Foundation. Without their support, we would not be able to have this successful event and seminar. With the importance of this issue, I should say that more public debate should be made on this under the auspices of this organization, and we will make the next step, and that's my promise to you. Thank you again for your participation, and this is the end of our session 4-3. Thank you.